Imagine standing outside an amusement park, watching all the joy and excitement, but knowing you can't be a part of it. That's exactly where 8-year-old Olivia finds herself, clutching a worn-out teddy bear and pressing her small nose against the iron gate of Dreamland Amusement Park. It's Children's Day, and inside, colourful balloons dance in the autumn breeze while the cheerful carousel music fills the air. Families are laughing, children are rushing past with wide-eyed excitement, but Olivia can only watch from the outside. She's wearing a faded yellow dress, a hand-me-down from a church donation, and even though it's not as bright as the other children's clothes, it's the best she has. Her mother, Elena, had promised that they could at least watch the fun from here, while she went to buy popcorn with the few coins she had left. Since losing her job at the factory months ago, Eleanor had been struggling, working whatever job she could find to keep a roof over their heads. Watching the other kids rush inside with their parents, Olivia couldn't help but wonder why life seemed so unfair, why others had so much when she and her mom had so little. But she didn't complain. She was used to pretending everything was okay. As her mother walked away to get the popcorn, Olivia found herself wandering along the fence, drawn in by the sounds of laughter and the sight of the magical rides just beyond her reach. That's when she saw them. A man in a perfectly tailored suit and a little girl standing beside him. At first, it wasn't the man who caught her attention. It was the girl. She had dark brown hair, falling in neat ringlets, wearing a beautiful blue dress with a white sash. But more than that, she looked familiar. Olivia froze in her tracks, her heart suddenly racing. The little girl looked exactly like her. Same hazel eyes, same button nose, even the same heart-shaped face. They both had a small birthmark near their right eyebrow. It was like staring at her own reflection, but one dressed in the kind of fancy clothes she'd never dreamed of wearing before. She knew it. Olivia had taken a few hesitant steps forward. Her worn teddy bear felt tighter in her arms as she gathered the courage to speak. "Hi, sir," Olivia said quietly, her voice small but steady. "Why does your daughter look exactly like me?" The man, who had been focused on his phone, suddenly looked up. His piercing blue eyes widened in shock as they landed on Olivia. He dropped his phone, the expensive device clattering to the pavement, forgotten. Even the little girl, Sophie, turned to stare, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging at her father's sleeve. "She looks like me." For a moment, Alexander Reeves, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, found himself speechless. He stared at Olivia, then at Sophie, then back at Olivia again. The resemblance was undeniable, and it sent his mind racing. Who was this child? And why did she look exactly like his daughter? As if in a daze, Alexander finally spoke. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sounding strange. Even to himself, he couldn't tear his eyes away from Olivia's face. "Where are your parents?" "My name is Olivia," she answered, politely, pointing vaguely behind her. "My mom went to buy popcorn. We can't go inside the park today, but she said we could watch from here." "Wilson," Alexander repeated, his voice barely a whisper. He glanced back at Sophie, his mind still trying to process the impossible. He knelt down, now eye level with both girls, and asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "How old are you, Olivia?" "I'm 8, she replied proudly. "I'll be 9 in January, January 15th. Alexander's breath caught audibly. January 15th. His heart pounded as he tried to keep his composure. "January 15th, he whispered, almost to himself. Everything started to fall into place, but before he could say anything more, a panicked voice rang out through the crowd. "Olivia! Olivia! Where are you?" Elena came rushing toward them, her face pale and frantic, until her eyes landed on her daughter. Relief flooded through her, but only for a moment. As she got closer, she realized who her daughter was standing with. The popcorn bag fell from her hands, scattering across the pavement as she stood frozen, staring at the man she hadn't seen in 8 long years. "Elena," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. It was as if the world had stopped. The noise of the amusement park faded into the background, leaving just the 3 of them standing there in shock. Elena's eyes filled with emotions she had buried for years. Pain, anger, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Olivia, sensing the sudden tension between the adults, instinctively moved closer to her mother. Sophie looked between her father and Elena, clearly confused by the strange atmosphere. "Daddy," she asked, tugging at his sleeve again, "do you know her?" "We were friends a long time ago," Alexander managed, his voice barely steady. Elena's laugh was bitter and short. "Friends? Is that what we're calling it now?" Alexander's eyes never left Elena's face, 1,000 unspoken words hanging between them. His mind raced with questions, with regrets. Was this why she had disappeared without a word all those years ago? Was Olivia his daughter? "Eleanor," he said quietly, "we need to talk." But Eleanor shook her head, already pulling Olivia closer. "We have nothing to talk about." Before Alexander could say anything else, Sophie spoke up, her innocent voice cutting through the thick tension. "Can they come into the park with us, Daddy? Please?" Alexander looked down at Sophie, then back at Olivia. His heart twisted painfully. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "That's an excellent idea, Sophie." But even as they entered the amusement park together, the truth hung heavy in the air. Who really was Olivia? And what would happen when the secrets of the past finally came to light? The answers were just out of reach, and none of them were prepared for what was coming next. As the 4 of them walked through the gates of Dreamland Amusement Park, the cheerful music and bright lights seemed to contrast with the heavy tension between the adults. Olivia, holding tightly to her mother's hand, glanced around in awe at the colorful rides and booths. She couldn't believe she was actually inside, surrounded by the laughter and joy she had only watched from afar, minutes ago. Sophie, oblivious to the storm brewing between her father and Elena, skipped ahead, excitedly pointing at a cotton candy stand. "Can we get some, Daddy?" Sophie asked, her eyes lighting up as she pulled at Alexander's sleeve. He smiled softly at his daughter, his thoughts elsewhere. "Of course, sweetheart." He turned to Elena and Olivia. "Would you like some?" Elena's lips tightened. She shook her head, her eyes distant. "We're fine." But Olivia's stomach grumbled, and Eleanor noticed her daughter's longing gaze on the fluffy pink cotton candy. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Just one for Olivia, please." They stood in awkward silence as Alexander bought the treat, handing it over to Olivia with a faint smile. "Here you go." Olivia, still a little unsure of what was happening, smiled back politely. "Thank you, sir." As they moved through the park, the distance between Elena and Alexander grew more palpable. Every now and then, he would glance at her, his mind swirling with questions he didn't dare to ask in front of the girls. Why had she left without a trace? Why had she never told him about Olivia? Was she really his daughter? But Eleanor avoided his gaze. Her jaw clenched as if she was bracing herself for what was to come. She knew this day would change everything, and the thought terrified her. She had worked so hard to protect Olivia, to give her a life without complications. Now, that fragile balance was crumbling. After a few minutes of walking in silence, Alexander couldn't take it anymore. He stopped, turning to Elena with a look of quiet desperation. "We need to talk. Now." Elena stiffened. "Not here. Not in front of them." "I can't wait any longer," he said, lowering his voice so the girls couldn't hear. "I need to know the truth, Elena. Is Olivia my daughter?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had dreaded this moment for 8 long years. There was no denying it any longer. The resemblance between Olivia and Sophie was too strong to ignore, and Alexander was no fool. She turned away, staring at a family riding the Ferris wheel together, trying to gather the strength to respond. Just as she was about to speak, Sophie ran up, pulling Olivia along with her. "Can we go on the carousel, Daddy? Please?" Alexander forced a smile, his focus torn between the urgent conversation with Elena and his daughter's innocent excitement. "Of course," he replied, glancing at Elena again. "We'll talk after." The girls ran ahead, eager to get in line for the carousel. Elena sighed in relief, grateful for the temporary distraction. But she knew this momentary reprieve wouldn't last. Her past was catching up with her, and there was no escaping it now. As they watched the girls climb onto the painted horses, Alexander turned to Elena, his voice soft but firm. "You owe me an explanation." Elena's eyes hardened. "I don't owe you anything, Alexander. You were the one who walked away from us." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? I never walked away. You disappeared. I searched for you everywhere." "You didn't try hard enough," she snapped, her voice shaking with the weight of old wounds. "I sent letters. I called your office, but you never responded. You were too busy with your business, with your empire, to care about us." Alexander's face went pale. "Letters? Calls? I never received any of them. Elena, I swear." Before he could finish, the carousel ride came to an end, and the girls came running back toward them, laughing and holding hands. Olivia's face was glowing with joy, her cotton candy in one hand, and Sophie was beaming, clearly having found a new friend. The tension between the adults was invisible to the children, who were simply happy to be enjoying the day. "We want to go on the bumper cars next," Sophie exclaimed, pulling on her father's arm. Alexander forced another smile. "Okay, you girls go ahead." As the two girls ran off, Elena crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "It doesn't matter now, does it? The truth is, Olivia is your daughter, but I raised her alone, without your help." Her words hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He had missed 8 years of his daughter's life. 8 years he could never get back. His heart ached as he watched Olivia laughing with Sophie. 2 little girls who looked so much alike, but came from such different worlds. He didn't know whether to feel anger, sadness, or guilt. "I didn't know," Alexander said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "If I had known, I would have been there." Elena's expression softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. You can't change the past, Alexander. But I can be part of her future," he said, his voice firm. "I want to be there for her, Elena. She's my daughter too." Elena's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying? You want to take her away from me?" "No," he replied quickly. "I'm not trying to take her away. I just want to know her, to be in her life." Elena hesitated. She had spent so many years shielding Olivia from the world Alexander belonged to, the world of wealth, power, and all the complications that came with it. She didn't want her daughter caught in the middle of something she couldn't control. "I need time to think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is all too much." Before Alexander could respond, Olivia and Sophie came running back again, their faces flushed with excitement. "That was so fun," Olivia exclaimed, her eyes shining as she looked up at her mother. "Can we go on the Ferris wheel next?" Elena smiled softly, brushing a hand through Olivia's hair. "Maybe later, sweetie." Alexander watched the tender moment between mother and daughter, his heart heavy. He had lost so much time, and now he was terrified of losing even more. But he knew he couldn't push Eleanor. If he wanted to be a part of Olivia's life, he would have to earn her trust again. As they continued walking through the park, the unspoken tension lingered, growing heavier with each step. The day that had started with innocent joy was now a swirl of emotions, with the past and future colliding in ways none of them could have anticipated. Alexander knew the confrontation wasn't over, but for now, they had to navigate the fragile new reality that was beginning to unfold. The truth was out, but the real question remained: what would happen next? As the day at the amusement park went on, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Alexander. Every laugh Olivia shared with Sophie, every glance Alexander stole at his daughter, filled her with a deep unease. She had spent so long protecting Olivia, keeping their lives simple, free from complications. Now everything was unraveling. The girls were inseparable, as if they had known each other their whole lives. They rode the Ferris wheel, played carnival games, and shared snacks like they were best friends. Watching them, Elena couldn't help but notice just how similar they were. Not just in appearance, but in their mannerisms, their energy, even the way they smiled. It was uncanny. As evening began to fall and the bright lights of the park grew even more dazzling, Alexander knew he had to confront Elena again. He couldn't leave things unresolved. The truth was out now, but it still felt like there were pieces missing. Unanswered questions that gnawed at him. While the girls were busy winning stuffed animals at one of the game booths, he gently pulled Elena aside. "We need to talk, really talk," he said softly, his eyes pleading. Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping as she nodded. She couldn't avoid it any longer. They found a quiet bench away from the crowd, where the sounds of the park faded into the background. "I understand why you're angry," Alexander began. "I would be too, if I thought someone had abandoned me and my child. But Elena, I swear, I never got any of your letters or calls. If I had known, I would have been there." She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I thought you didn't care. After all, you had everything. The money, the success. What would you need with us? With me?" Alexander shook his head, his voice firm. "That's not true. I didn't want any of this without you. I thought you left because you didn't want to be part of my world anymore." Elena blinked, surprised by the pain in his voice. For so long, she had built up this image of him in her mind. Cold, distant, too busy with his billionaire lifestyle to care about her or Olivia. But now, seeing him like this, vulnerable and full of regret, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice soft. "I didn't think you'd want us in your life. And when I didn't hear from you, I thought I made the right choice, staying away." Alexander's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand. "I never stopped looking for you, Elena. I never stopped caring." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history settling between them. The years of misunderstanding, of lost time, hung in the air like a heavy fog. But slowly that fog began to lift as they faced the truth together. "I don't know what happens next," Elena said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to move forward from here." Alexander glanced over at the girls, who were still laughing and playing together without a care in the world. He smiled faintly. "We figure it out, together, for them." Elena followed his gaze, watching Olivia and Sophie as they shared a moment of pure joy. She had always done everything she could to give Olivia a happy life, but seeing her daughter with her father, knowing she could have more, made her heart ache in a different way. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear, the anger, and allow them both the chance to know each other. "Do you really want to be a part of her life?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Alexander didn't hesitate. More than anything, Elena nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had spent so many years trying to shield Olivia from the world, but maybe it was time to open that door, to let her daughter have the family she deserved. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this situation was. But she couldn't deny Olivia the chance to know her father, and deep down, she knew it was what Olivia needed. Just as she wiped her tears away, the girls came running over, excitedly holding up their new stuffed animals. "Look, Mom! Look what we won!" Olivia beamed, holding up a large teddy bear. Elena smiled through her tears, her heart full. "That's wonderful, sweetie." Sophie grinned at her father. "Can we go on one last ride, Daddy?" Alexander chuckled softly, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "Of course. One more." As the girls ran off to the next ride, Elena and Alexander stood side by side, watching them. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, there was hope. Hope for healing, for a future where Olivia could know both of her parents, and where they could learn to coexist for her sake. "You'll give us time?" Elena asked, her voice soft but steady. "As much as you need," Alexander promised. "I just want to be there, however you'll let me." Elena nodded, grateful for his understanding. She knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild the trust between them, but seeing how much he cared for their daughter gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. As the night drew to a close, and the bright lights of the park flickered around them, Elena and Alexander stood together, united by the love they both had for Olivia. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Olivia was no longer alone. She had both of them now, and that was all that mattered. As the final ride came to an end, and the girls came running back, their faces lit with joy, Elena smiled. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that none of them had expected, but was full of possibilities. And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of their daughters, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things would turn out all right. So